I rise to speak on this Fair Work Amendment Protecting Take-Home Pay Bill 2017. This decision to cut penalty rates is a terrible blow to some 700,000 Australians, but indeed it's a terrible blow to all Australians. It's a terrible blow particularly to thousands of Tasmanians in my home state. In fact, it's a terrible blow to some 40,246 Tasmanians employed in the retail and food and accommodation services in Tasmania, who will be worse off if this legislation was to pass, as the government would choose it does. This, of course, will take thousands of dollars from their annual wage. So that is what we are arguing about here, whether we are a country who wants to take thousands of dollars off some of the lowest paid workers who are trying to make ends meet. It will put an impact on their ability to afford the basic necessities of life. These are people who already have to make impossible choices about whether to pay their overdue rent or whether to buy food for their kids. The Turnbull government is never going to understand the stress of not being able to afford to be able to pay your bills, of having to skip meals, all in order to make ends meet. They do not know, nor do they care about the people doing it tough. Well, Mr Acting Deputy President, I am the proud daughter of a hospitality worker. As a single parent, my mum relied on penalty rates. As a single parent, my mum worked really hard to provide for me, to work really hard to provide for both of us. She was a proud union member. She knew that her union supported her, that her union supported workers like her in protecting wages and conditions so that she could make ends meet, so that she could pay her rent, so that she could pay for food for me and her. And I stand with all of the hospitality workers, all of the single parents that are like my mum, who need those penalty rates. Labor stands with those workers in the retail, in the food and beverage, hospitality and other sectors that rely on penalty rates. And without those penalty rates, life indeed will get very, very difficult for them. Now, I too, as a young mum, as I was, putting myself through university, worked in the hospitality sector, and I relied on penalty rates. My Aus study that I received at that time was certainly not enough to pay for the rent and to pay for my family and my young baby to ensure we had enough to get through, as well as while I continued to study at that time. So my life experience is like the life experience of other people in this place, people at least on this side of the chamber, who actually understand what it's like to do it tough and what necessity it is to have decent wages and conditions in order families to provide for their own. So that's what this decision is all about. It is a decision that will cost, of course, the budget bottom line up to $650 million. It will drive down income tax revenue and it will drive up welfare costs. And yet it is another example of this Turnbull government's attacks on Australians that can least afford it. It will hurt Tasmania's most vulnerable workers, and I stand, as I know my other Tasmanian Labor senators do, with those Tasmanian workers. Now, some of those Tasmanian workers have contacted my office and have told us about what will happen for them and what is already happening for them in them trying to make ends meet for their family. And that is because at the moment, inequality in Australia is at a 75-year high. Wages growth is at historic lows, and underemployment is at record highs. People want to be able to work more because they need to make ends meet. Well, I was contacted amongst a number of Tasmanians concerned that they will no longer be able to make basic housing, food and transport costs by a particular Tasmanian who stood out to me. He works as a full-time sheet metal tradesman, but he has now had to pick up a second job to provide for his family. He works every 12 days out of 14, missing significant time with his family. His penalty rates, Mr Acting Deputy President, are not a luxury. His penalty rates are helping him provide for his family and to make ends meet. Tasmanians who work so hard to provide for their families and have these cuts will have a major significant impact on their well-being. Is this really the kind of society that the Australian government wants to have put in place? Is this the kind of legacy that the Turnbull government wants to have in its wake as the government that cut penalty rates? Well, I recently had some experience of what the American system is like for hospitality workers, a system that we know is relied completely these days on tips, on the goodwill of the customer, because wages are so low. The minimum wage is so low, despite some work to lift it under the previous President Barack Obama. Minimum wages are still so low that those workers rely on tips. Is that the kind of society we want here in Australia, where we no longer have that safety net, where we have this kind of Americanisation of our wages and conditions? Well, I say no. Labor says no. We do not want that sort of system here in Australia. We don't want it in our healthcare system, and we certainly don't want it in our wages and conditions, in our workplace relations system. And this is, I believe, the thin end of the wedge that what the Turnbull government is trying to achieve here. Well, those of us on this side of the chamber, Labor will stand with the workers of Australia. We will stand with the low-income workers of Australia. We will stand with the families of Australia, with the workers like the sheet metal worker I just described in Tasmania, who's had to take out a second job in order to make ends meet. We will do something about inequality in this country that is so high, and yet it is not even a thought bubble in the Prime Minister's purview, because he simply doesn't care. He doesn't care because he's out of touch. He doesn't have the experience of what it is like, nor does he even want to reach out and meet people with that experience. Well, that just shows you that this government has completely lost its way, and attacking some of the lowest workers in the country, attacking those basic safety nets of penalty rates is simply appalling, and this government should hang its head in shame.
Thank you.